loss. That's what they wanted me to believe, that I had failed, that the prize slipped through my hands, that the game was over. They laughed, they celebrated, they held their trophies high as if I was supposed to feel smaller. But the truth, I never needed what they were chasing. Their victory was just noise, shiny, hollow, meaningless noise. And silence is louder. They thought I was competing. They thought I cared about the same finish line. But while they raced in circles, desperate for applause, I was already elsewhere, outside their track, outside their rules. They never noticed, because they were too busy measuring themselves against each other, too blind to see that I wasn't even playing. I was watching. I was smiling. What they call a prize, I call a leash. What they call victory, I call addiction. Their need to win defines them. My refusal to need defines me. That's the difference they can't stand. Because when you stop needing what they crave, you stop belonging to their world. And nothing unsettles the crowd more than someone who doesn't care for the crown they worship. They wanted me broken. They wanted me desperate. They wanted to see me reach, beg, grasp at their worthless reward. Instead, I sat still, and the silence cut deeper than any loss could. They couldn't understand it, couldn't process it. Because how do you defeat someone who never needed to play in the first place? So they cheered, they mocked, they crowned themselves kings of nothing. And I watched, amused, because deep down they knew their win wasn't mine to lose. It was never mine at all. And that's the punchline, that's the joke. They think they won. But the truth, they just never realized the prize was empty. They called it victory. They held it up like proof, like a shield, as if the glittering prize could silence the truth underneath. But the more they smiled, the more I saw the cracks, the desperate grip, the trembling hands. Because trophies aren't made of strength, they're made of fear. Fear of being forgotten, fear of being nothing without the object they cling to. I didn't need it. That's what unsettled them. I watched their eyes dart, looking for my reaction, searching for anger, for jealousy, for some sign that I cared. But I didn't. I couldn't. The prize meant nothing to me, and that nothing was heavier than any celebration they could stage. Their laughter felt hollow even to them, because silence exposes everything they try to hide. The game was always theirs, the rules were theirs, the scoreboard, the finish line, the applause, it all belonged to them. And still, they needed me there, watching. Without me, their win tasted bitter. That's the truth they'll never admit. Their joy depends on my loss. And if I refuse to lose, if I refuse to care, then their joy collapses in on itself. So they danced, they cheered, they shouted my name in mockery, but I stayed still. I stayed quiet, and in that quiet their voices grew sharp, frantic, unconvincing. They didn't win. They only proved how badly they needed the illusion of winning. And me, I smiled, because I knew the one truth they'd never face. You can't win against someone who never needed the prize. They held their prize high, but every second it weighed heavier in their hands. The applause they fed on started to fade, echoing in a room that grew colder with each passing moment. They thought I was the one left empty-handed, but the truth is, emptiness belongs to them. Their prize was nothing more than a mirror reflecting their need, and that need was louder than their victory. I never moved. I didn't need to, because stillness exposes what noise tries to cover. The harder they celebrated, the clearer it became. They weren't celebrating me, they were celebrating the absence of me. But absence isn't defeat, it's freedom. I was already gone, already outside their game, and they were still running laps inside a cage built from their own applause. It was almost funny watching them cling to something they believed defined them, as if without the prize they would cease to exist, and maybe they would. That's why they cheered so loud, why they laughed so hard, because silence pressed against them, reminding them that once the noise ends, there's nothing left. Control doesn't belong to the one who wins. Control belongs to the one who decides the prize is worthless. That's the difference they never understood. They thought the trophy was power, but the moment I refused to need it, the power shifted. It was mine, quiet, invisible, absolute. And so I smiled, not because I lost, but because I never had to play. Their win wasn't proof of strength, it was proof of dependence, and dependence is weakness. That's the joke they'll never laugh at. The noise grew louder. They gathered closer, their voices stacking on top of each other, desperate to drown out the silence I carried. They waved their trophies in my face, parading their victories as if the shine could blind me. But the more they shouted, the more it all blurred into static. And static is nothing but proof of desperation. They wanted me to envy them. They wanted me to fight for what they clutched so tightly. But envy is just another chain, and I had already cut mine. That's why my smile unsettled them, because it didn't hide pain, it didn't mask defeat. It mocked the very stage they were standing on, a stage built on prizes that mean nothing the second the lights go out. Their celebration began to fracture. The laughter turned sharp, hollow, forced. Every glance between them asked the same silent question. Why isn't he broken? They couldn't understand how someone could stand in their arena and refuse to kneel, refuse to care. Their world revolved around the prize. Mine didn't. That difference tore them apart more than any loss ever could. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Silence was enough. It pressed against them, heavier than applause, heavier than gold, heavier than victory itself. They thought they had taken everything from me, but in truth, I had taken everything from them, the meaning of their win. And so the crowd that thought it owned me began to collapse under its own weight. not because I fought, not because I resisted, but because I simply refused to need what they worshipped. That refusal was the sharpest blade of all. They thought the game had ended, that the prize defined the story, that their cheers sealed my silence. But silence doesn't end, it transforms. And in that stillness, I became something else. Not the loser, not the forgotten. I became the reminder that their victory was hollow, that their prize was nothing more than a toy they handed themselves to feel alive. The shift was subtle, almost invisible. A smile carved itself across my face, slow, unhurried, untouchable. They froze, not because I moved, but because I didn't need to. In that instant, the silence no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the room. It belonged to them. Every heartbeat echoed louder. Every laugh died quicker. Every eye knew the truth. I hadn't lost. I had never played. That's the secret they'll never admit. You don't defeat someone who doesn't want what you're offering. You don't break someone who never needed the prize. I wasn't outside their game. I was above it. And from that height, their victory looked small, fragile, laughable. They mistook silence for absence, but silence was the only presence that mattered. And now, every time they hold that prize, they'll remember me, not as the one who lost, but as the one who made their win meaningless. That's not defeat, that's dominance. Subscribe. Not for me, not for them, for the silence that turns their victory into dust. Because the moment you stop needing the prize, you stop being owned by it. They thought silence was weakness. They thought my stillness meant defeat. But stillness is where the storm gathers. While they clung to their prize, I let go of everything. That's the difference. They were chained by their victory. I was freed by my refusal to need it. And freedom is heavier than any crown they will ever wear. I walked through their cheers as if they were whispers. Every sound cracked against the silence I carried, and the silence swallowed it whole. They couldn't stop watching me, even as they pretended to celebrate. The joke was written on their faces. They needed my reaction more than they needed the prize itself. And I gave them nothing but a smile that cut deeper than envy ever could. The real shift wasn't in me, it was in them. Their joy began to rot the moment they realized I wasn't broken. Because what is victory worth if the enemy refuses to fall? What is triumph worth if the silence laughs louder than the applause? Every second I stood still, I became larger. And every second they cheered, they became smaller. Power isn't about winning. Power isn't about holding the prize. power is making the prize irrelevant. That's what they could never see. They measured themselves in points and applause, while I measured myself in silence. And silence always outlives the noise. So I didn't rise by chasing, I rose by refusing. And in that refusal, the ground beneath their victory started to crumble. That's when the game stopped belonging to them. That's when it became mine. Their hands still clutched the prize, but the shine had dulled. Every second they held it, the silence wrapped tighter around their throats. They wanted the world to believe they had won, but the world only saw the unease in their eyes. Because a trophy doesn't glow on its own. It only glows when someone else desires it. And I didn't. That's why their victory began to rot. I could see it in the way they glanced at each other, searching for reassurance in the cracks of their own smiles. The applause grew faint, not because the crowd was gone, but because the silence was louder. That's the irony. They thought the prize made them powerful, but the moment I refused to want it, it turned into weight. It dragged them down while I stood untouched. Claim. I let them keep the prize, and in doing so, I proved it was worthless. Because power isn't holding what everyone else wants. It's making them realize it was never worth holding. That realization is a cut deeper than any defeat. Their win chained them tighter than any loss could chain me. And as they struggled to pretend their celebration still mattered, I grew untouchable. The silence wasn't just mine anymore, it was theirs too. It invaded their laughter, turned it shaky, fragile, unconvincing. And in that moment they stopped celebrating and started fearing. That's the real prize, not the object in their hands, but the emptiness it revealed. And in that emptiness I was the only one who could smile. They thought the prize would crown them. Instead, it chained them. Every second they clutched it, their victory shrank into something fragile, something they had to defend instead of celebrate. And me? I didn't need to defend anything. Silence doesn't need walls, it doesn't need applause, it just exists, and in its existence, it dominates. The air shifted around us, their voices cracked, their laughter stumbled, and their pride turned into a mask that slipped with every heartbeat. They tried to act as if nothing was wrong, but everything was wrong. Because the more they celebrated, the more obvious it became. I was the center of the room, not them, not the prize, me, the one who stood without wanting what they worshipped. It's strange, isn't it? How absence becomes presence, how stillness becomes the loudest scream. They waved their trophy high, but no one was watching it anymore. Every eye was on me, on the silence that refused to break, on the smile that refused to fade. And in that gaze, their triumph evaporated. Power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't beg to be noticed. It just settles into the bones of those too blind to see it coming. And that's what happened. My silence became gravity. It bent the air, bent their voices, bent their confidence until they couldn't stand without shaking. So they won, they got their prize, but their victory ended the moment they realized it couldn't drown me out. And the silence they feared most, it was never theirs to control. It was always mine. The room was never theirs, not the lights, not the crowd, not even the air they breathed. The silence had spread too far, too deep. It filled the cracks in the walls, crawled across the floor, and settled into every shadow. They thought they owned the moment, but the moment had already betrayed them. It bent toward me, not them. Every sound they made echoed wrong, thin, fragile, desperate. Their laughter didn't rise, it broke. Their cheers didn't fill the space. They collapsed inside it. Because silence doesn't compete, silence consumes. And now it consumed everything, their prize, their pride, their presence, until all that was left was the undeniable weight of me. They shifted in their seats. They tightened their grip on what they thought was victory, but their knuckles turned white. Their smiles cracked. Their eyes betrayed them. They couldn't admit it, but they felt it. I was the center, I was the gravity, and their prize had turned into an anchor, pulling them into the dark. The crowd didn't cheer for long. Even the boldest voices faltered. No one wanted to be the one to break the silence again, because every sound only proved its strength. The silence wasn't emptiness anymore. It was presence. A presence they couldn't escape. A presence they couldn't ignore. And that's the truth they'll never erase. I didn't take their prize. I didn't take their victory. I took the air itself. And once silence owns the air, nothing else survives. Part does. They called it winning. They held their prize, smiled their broken smiles, and waited for me to collapse under the weight of their celebration. But collapse never came. All that came was silence. And silence doesn't end. It waits. It lingers. It owns. Their victory turned to dust the moment they realized it couldn't touch me. And in that dust, in that hollow echo of their own applause, they saw it, what I had known all along. They didn't win, they never could, because I was never playing their game. The prize chained them. The silence freed me. That's the joke. That's the truth. And it doesn't need laughter to cut. It just is. So let them keep their trophies. Let them dance in the ruins of their own celebration. I'll keep what they can't touch, what they can't own, what they'll never understand, silence.